Great Spiritual Migration. This is his most recent book. Cornerstone has been a part of Brian's life, reading his books, and Brian has been a part, and we've been a part of Brian's life as well. And so beginning a long time ago with Generous Orthodoxy, one of his earlier books, and moving all the way through, we've read every single one of his books up to this point. And this is the most recent. And every person in our leadership formation team has read this book. And I want to encourage you to pick up a copy as well. He didn't ask me to do this. This is not a promo. He's not trying to sell the book. Brian came because he loves Cornerstone and what's going on at Cornerstone, and has something to share today with us about what does it mean to love better. So I want to welcome Brian McLaren to come forward at this time.
Really good to be here with you all. I'm your neighbor. I live down the road, and I love your church. I really like your pastor. I know it's hard to believe, but and I love what's going on here. I love your kids here. I love what Dominique's doing with your kids. I love your garden out there, your community garden. I think it's so amazing. I keep up with people in this church. Almost everything good that's happening around Naples. There's so many good things that are happening around Naples. Folks here are involved with, and I think you all set a great example. So I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to have Brian with us, and we were talking about. I invited him, and he was able to come, which is a gift to us today, and so I thought I'd just ask him some questions around that topic of what does it mean to love better. And the first question I have is that in your book, you talk about, first and foremost, that the church is called to be a school of love. And what do you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, I wish it were obvious. But it's not. Because for a whole lot of people, when they think of church, they think of a school of judgment. It's a place where you go to learn how to judge other people. And if it weren't enough to judge them on how they look, you can judge them on all kinds of other things, including whether they have the right beliefs or whether they do the rituals correctly and so on. So our churches are known for a lot of other things, unfortunately. But if our churches were a school of love, what it would mean is that every time a baby is born into a faith community, the people in the congregation would say, it's our job in this community, between now and the time that child is 16 or 18 or however many years old, that our child will learn the basics of how to be a loving person. But not only that, a lot of y'all realize that your hardest lessons in love happen after you grew up. Like when you got married. There were some challenges, right? If you were married, the person next to you had to figure out how to deal with you. That was a challenge for them. So then you think of those challenges. You think of the challenges of learning to love your kids. And then helping the kids learn how to love you as parents. And then have you all noticed as you get older, new challenges in love come to the fore. In the last 8 or 10 years or so, had care for my elderly parents, and my dad passed away a couple of years ago. Now I have care for my mother. New lessons in love that I'm grappling with every day. So you realize that across the life cycle, we either stop growing or we keep growing in love. And here's the deal, folks. It would be nice if you could subcontract learning how to love to somebody else, but it's nobody else's job. And when churches aren't teaching us how to love, our whole society experiences real trouble. Our whole world experiences real trouble. So that's why I feel a great sense of urgency about this. And can I say, it's another reason I have great respect for your congregation. Because look, I wish this weren't true, but I don't know how many million people across the country go to church on an average Sunday. But quite a few million. I think more people go to church on an average Sunday than people go to NFL games in a whole season, right? It's a lot of people who show up in church. But can I tell you something? A whole lot of people will go in, sing some songs, stand up, sit down. Some will be more aerobic, some will be less aerobic, but they'll go to all kinds of church services, and a whole lot of them will go home not having had their hearts expanded to love more, right? And then you think, what would happen if those millions of people, every Sunday that they went to church, their heart got a little bit of renovation, a little bit of enlargement through that experience. And here's my feeling. If people knew that that's what churches were for and that's what churches did and could make a reasonable promise, we promise if you become part of this community, we will help you become a more loving person, a more loving version of you. I'm pretty sure that we'd have waiting lists for people to get in if people believe that promise and that we could make. So that's why I think it's important.
Yeah, so if the church is kind of a school or academy for love, what would the curriculum look like for that? And what's 101, loving 101?
Yeah, so there's a lot of ways you could start on this. Remember when in that scripture reading, by the way, did you notice it said when a legal expert? Well, the law was the Hebrew scriptures, the Torah. So it meant a Bible expert, right? So this is a theologian asked Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? Have you ever noticed something about Jesus? He never answers a question straight. Like, you ask him the question, he says, well, what do you think? Or you ask him the question, what about this? And he says, there once was a man who had 2 sons, right? He tells you this story, and you think, what does that have to do with anything? This is the one time when it looks like he's going to answer a question straight. What's the greatest commandment? And then he says the thing that every religious person knew, there's only one God. And you should love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And right at that moment, the theological expert is thinking, oh, wow, he gave a straight answer, because he asked, what is the one greatest commandment? And he answers, but then he says, and the second. And in a couple of the other Gospels, his answer is, and the second is equally important. And that's to love your neighbor as yourself. It's one of the most radical teachings of Jesus. It's one of the most radical teachings in human history. To say that the love of God can never, ever again in history be separated from the love of neighbor. And that's why I would actually start with level 101. Basic love is loving neighbor. Now, part of that is because of human development. When you are born, your first experience of love is loving your neighbor. You don't even understand the concept of God at the beginning. You learn love by loving your neighbor, and that usually starts with your parents. And I have this memory, I always love recall this memory. We have, my wife Grace and I have 4 adult kids now, we have some grandkids too, but when our kids were really little, high chair sized kids, right? I remember one of my favorite things to feed kids was Cheerios, because I just think Cheerios are the perfect food source. They're compact, they don't make too big a mess. So I'd have a spoon of Cheerios and I'd bring it to my daughter's mouth, and just as it's coming to her mouth, of course they fall all over and they're all over the tray. Maybe 3 go in her mouth and 3 fall on the tray, right? And then there came a moment, I remember this for each of my kids, when the same thing happened. They'd see all these little slobbery Cheerios on their tray, and they'd have this sort of slobbery hand, and they'd reach down and touch some Cheerios, which would then be glued by slobber. And then they would reach out their hand to me, which, being a parent, what do? Take the strawberry in your mouth. But at that moment, you realize my child has been a receiver of my love, and my child is now wanting to imitate and now love me back. It's a profound thing. So it starts, I think we start learning love through love of neighbor. It starts with our family, maybe our parents, extends to our brothers and sisters, extends to our uncles and aunts and cousins, extends to our classmates in school and teammates on the field, extends to our professional, our office. In other words, through all of our life, our neighbor keeps expanding. I should say, in healthy situations, it keeps expanding. You know what happens to a lot of people? Their they get to a certain age, like I'm like this in art. Like I learned how to draw up to like age 14, and I've never drawn anything better than I did at age 14. Like I stopped developing in art at age 14. I don't know why, maybe somebody can help me out with a breakthrough, but I stopped developing in math at like age 12. But you know, some people stop developing in love, and that's a shame. So we want to teach people lifelong love for you.
Okay, so just on a practical, you've gone through 101. Now, what's curriculum 201 look like and 301?
So let me carry that through. You love, what did Jesus say? Love your neighbor as yourself. So I would say love 201 is you learn to love yourself. Now you might say, well, why don't you start there? I don't even think we're conscious of ourselves in the beginning. We're, you know, in some ways, you discover yourself through the way others react to you. And so the love, I think the deeply connected love of neighbor, love of self. I'll tell you how it worked for me. I was unaware of myself, right? Which is a little dangerous in some ways. Because you understand, when you're unaware of yourself, you're in a bad mood, but you're unaware of yourself, so what do you think? Everybody else is annoying today. You see what I'm saying? You're unaware of the part of this that you're bringing to the equation. So you become aware of yourself, and then you start realizing, if I love my neighbor, I want to know what are my neighbor's fears, desires, hopes, dreams, needs, deficits, strengths, weaknesses. And then you think, oh gosh, I ought to learn that about myself. I ought to learn how to be a friend of myself. I have some work to do in loving myself. That's not selfishness. That's self-discipline, self-control, self-development, and so on. All of that's very, very important. I would say all of that is love 201. And by the way, have you noticed, when you're 20, there are certain things you have to do that are part of your work of loving yourself. They're a little different when you're 35. Very different when you're 50. And some of us are discovering that, you know, when you're 60, 70, 80, there's still work to do on learning to be a good friend to yourself. That's love 201. I would say love 301 is not explicitly in the text, but I think it's necessary in today's world. And that's loving the earth. Because if you love your neighbor and you want your neighbor to be able to breathe air, you better care about the air and the climate. If you care about your neighbor being able to drink, you need to care about clean water. If you want your neighbor to be able to eat, you better care about the soil and climate and so on. So suddenly, to love your neighbor and yourself means you better love the earth on which all of us are dependent. It's not our fault, but in the lifetime of many of us in this room, the human species reached a tipping point. We are sucking, when you take all 7-point-something billion of us, we're sucking resources out of the earth faster than the earth can replenish them. We're pumping out toxins into the earth faster than the earth can detoxify. Suddenly, in our generation, you cannot talk about loving your neighbor and loving yourself unless you love the earth. And that would then lead, I think, to love 401, which I would call, which is loving God. Now you might say, why bring up that last? Isn't it most important? Well, yeah, you can put it first if you want. Sometimes we save the best for last. But here's the thing. Here's something I believe about God. If God is love, if you have people who are learning to love their neighbor, themselves, and all of creation, and then you teach them about God, in a sense, God is a familiar face for people who are learning to love. Does that make sense? But if you don't have people who are learning to love, and you try to teach them about God, what do you have left? Words, doctrines, ideas. And have you noticed that a lot of the meanest people in the world are people who talk a lot about God, apart from love for neighbor, self, and the earth. And so that's why I think when you have people who are in a community, it's why you can't separate them. It's why Jesus says, first commandment is love God, and you can't separate it from love neighbor as yourself. He puts them all together. That's, to me, why they go together. And so here's what I'd say. When you have people who are learning how to love as the whole package, to teach people about God in that context is a completely different experience than what that Bible scholar had previously understood. And here's where it really gets interesting to me, if I can indulge in some theological nerdity for a minute. You remember how in that passage, the Bible scholar, he says, good answer, Jesus. You said there's one God, and we should love God with all of our being. And then did you notice what he said? And to love your neighbor as yourself is more important than all of the sacrifices. Did you notice that little detail of the text? That's really radical for a religious scholar to say. Because you understand, the religion of his day was what we might call a forgiveness mafia. And a lot of religion becomes like this. You understand how the mafia works. They say, hey, you know, they come to you, own a business, right? They come to you and say, hey, you know, been a lot of robberies in this neighborhood lately, and there have been a lot of stores burned down in this neighborhood lately. If you pay us $1,000, we'll make sure your store doesn't burn down. And of course, you know what the subtext is. And if you don't pay us $1,000, we'll burn it down, right? In other words, we create the problem and we sell you the solution. And in a sense, what religions often do is they say, we'll make you feel really guilty every week, and then we'll help you feel better. And then make you feel guilty again next week, so you'll keep purchasing our supply, right? Look, we all need forgiveness, but forgiveness is just the beginning. The purpose of forgiveness is to lead us to love. So when that theologian says to love your neighbor, that's the point. That's what this thing is all about. And in my mind, that's why Jesus says, unusual, a theologian who actually gets it. You know, you're really there. You're not far. You're getting what really, really matters. Think of that. A theologian actually understanding. And this is, I think, what's going on in that scene.
And drawing off of that, there's a couple times, within the church, a lot of times people come to the church and they immediately like the worship service, they maybe like the community. And the next question is, I need to get involved in a Bible study, or I need to get involved in some kind of teaching moment. And in Cornerstone, I've always encouraged them not to just jump into those things, the programmatic ideas. In other words, a system to give you all the right answers, but to get involved in some kind of service, whether it be Habitat for Humanity or working at St. Matthew's House or meeting your neighbors or even growing and getting to know the people within the life of the church. Is that kind of what you're saying? Is maybe changing the paradigms?
So for people to understand, when you get out and work in the community garden, and there's somebody from the neighborhood who also works in the community garden who's an atheist, and somebody else from the neighborhood who comes to the community garden who's Muslim, somebody else who works in the community garden who's Jewish, and you're out there in the dirt together, getting to know each other. You're learning theology because you're learning love. And in the experience of loving your neighbor who's different from you, you're learning about God. When you learn about love, you're learning about God in ways that you couldn't just mastering a bunch of polysyllabic words like antediluvian and penal substitutionary atonement and, Methuselah, right? You're learning things about love that are not peripheral. They're the main course, right?
Can you share a little bit with us about the teleological suspension of the ethical?
That's it.
We could go there. And how about the generation that's coming up? What I hear you saying resonates, I think, with my conversations with millennials and even the digis that are coming up behind them. Share a little bit with Cornerstone, maybe what you've experienced talking with that generational group as far as what they're longing for.
Okay. So everybody, I'm about to tell you guys something that a lot of people don't know, okay? Around the country, there are a whole lot of churches that are on the verge of going out of business, largely because their congregation has gotten older and older, and young people have dropped out. And so when you're with those people, here's what they want to talk about. How can we get young people back? You understand what they're really saying? How can we get young people to come back and enjoy our agenda? Enjoy our music, enjoy our little shtick that we're doing here, right? And I just want to tell them, please don't bring them back for that. Please don't bring them back for that. But if you were to have an agenda that really mattered, it would be a whole different story. Don't try to get them back to what you're doing. You have to work on the new agenda. And here's what I can say. I can maybe give you two examples, especially for people, if you've grown up in the church and you like church and church makes sense to you, this might help you understand. I want you to imagine that if coming into this building, when you stood out at the front, there were a couple of angry people standing there like this. And here's the question they wanted to ask you. Do you believe the earth is round or flat? And if you said, I believe the earth is round, they said, you can't come here. You have to believe the earth is flat. They would think, why would I ever want to be part of a community? I don't care how good the music is. I don't care how nice the people are. If you ask me to tell a lie to come in, why would I want to do that, right? So for a whole lot of people, in a sense, there are angry people standing at the front door, checking them out, saying, you have to believe this, this, and this, that they don't actually believe, right? And so that feels disingenuous. But here's the other point. Imagine if you didn't grow up going to church, and every time you heard people talk about religion, it was in one of two contexts in the news. Since you don't go, you don't really know what it's like. You only know what you hear through the news. One, people killing each other in the name of God. Blowing themselves up, saying God is great while they blow themselves up. Or people depriving other people of rights because of racial differences or gender orientation or, political party. And they're doing that in the name of God, under cover of God. You would assume that these God people and these church people are nothing but trouble. And why would you want to join that club, But if people heard, there are these things, they're called churches, but they're not like those other places. And they're academies of love. Like, you go there, you're going to become a more loving person. Some people would not be interested. In fact, some people who currently go to church would drop out. You change that agenda. But I think among a whole lot of younger people, if they understood, I'm going to learn to love my neighbor, which includes stranger, outsider, outcast, other, and even enemy. I'm going to learn how to love myself. I'm going to learn how to love the earth. And then love the God, the Spirit, the source, the Creator, who holds it all in God's love. Man, I think, like, people wouldn't say, why be part of that? They'd think, why hasn't anybody ever invited me into that?
So what do you do with all the people in the world that hate and are bound into like a cult of violence, or even just Christians in America who have embraced a response to the problems of the world with kind of this finding justice through violence?
Yes. This is really a good question. I read a book a few years ago called Why Did Jesus, Moses, the Buddha, and Muhammad Cross the Road? And it was a book about Christian identity in a multi-faith world against the backdrop of religious violence. And when I was doing the research for the book, I had this aha moment. And like, maybe this is obvious to you all, but I never realized this before. Here is the aha moment. A suicide bomber who straps explosives on himself and gets ready to go into a crowd. Or these days, somebody who rents a truck and drives it into a city getting ready to kill a bunch of people. Or the guy who loads all kinds of guns on himself and gets ready to go into a public place and take lives, right? Those people aren't thinking, I hate people and I can't wait to kill them. That's not what's in their mind. Here's what's in their mind. I love my people. And they're being insulted and harmed by other people. Because of my love for my little in-group, I'm going to stop those other bad people from hurting the people I love. Their experience is an experience of love. In that way, love is dangerous if it stops growing, if its growth is stunted. And this is why we need faith communities that teach people, you've got to love beyond. You've got to love beyond. Love to a bigger circle. And we got to say the truth, folks. In the United States, we're finding out that there's a whole lot of people who love people of their race. And they stop loving beyond. Love people of their class, their political party. love people of their gender orientation, love people of their religious persuasion. But how do we learn to genuinely love them?
You know, we had a co-worker who was here for a while at Cornerstone, named was Sheena, and she would always ask, you know, what's the overall vision that I have as a pastor of Cornerstone? And it's rooted in the liturgy that we've shared for years, which is we're about breaking down the walls and the barriers that separate us from God and each other, from ourselves and from creation. So you've got your four parts of your curriculum there. That was said. We say that a lot here. And I really take that seriously, this idea of letting the walls come down so that we might be a community that celebrates the diversity that exists. So having Democrats, Republicans, Hillary supporters, or Trump supporters, black, white, green, pink, straight, gay, everybody's here. And that this is the place where that can happen in a way that we can all grow towards something. So living into that, what would be the challenge you might offer at Cornerstone in living into God's future here in this community we call Naples, Collier County?
You know, I used that phrase a minute ago, to love beyond. And I think the challenge that I would give to every individual here is to just say, let's all admit, wherever we are right at this moment, we're not done yet. We're half-baked. We're unfinished. You know, we're an unfinished symphony. And our next step of growth is learning to love the next ring of people who we haven't yet come to understand and connect with. And I think there are two ways we do that. I think there's what we might call preemptive love, and there's reparative love. Preemptive love, those are the habits you can learn in this community, that when you go out every Sunday into the world practicing those habits, you actually increase the love temperature of Collier County. And so, for example, one of them is, I think if you're a Christian, you move toward the other. So you walk into a room and you see a Muslim woman with a hijab sitting over in the corner. Instead of staying away, you say, I'm a follower of Christ. You go and sit down, you say hello, you introduce yourself, you smile, you make contact, right? We build those relationships. Look, I mean, I mentioned race a minute ago, but, you know, imagine what would have happened in the 1700s if American churches were teaching people to love beyond your racial identity. It didn't happen in the 1700s. Imagine if it happened in the 1800s. Didn't happen in the 1800s. Imagine if it happened in the 1900s. Didn't happen in the 1900s. 2017, it's still not happening. Places like this, we can say to love means for us to reach beyond and to start developing a larger circle of us, racially, religiously, politically, in every dimension. And that is possible. And then there's a reparative kind of love that says the divides are already there, there's tension there. How do I move into that space and bring healing? Because what a lot of us do is we just avoid anything we avoid potential tension. And my recommendation for people here in Cornerstone would be, whenever you find a person who differs from you, let's say politically or something like that, instead of walking on eggshells, show unexpected, sincere curiosity. Tell me why you see it that way. Where did you learn that? What are the values you think that make that important? And you just start asking questions to show a sincere interest, not to agree or disagree, but to understand. That simple practice helps build, it helps like sutures that heal the wounds that are divine.
So you're saying you actually want us to care about people.
I know that sounds crazy.
What are the challenges you're facing when it comes to love?
So I'll tell you, because I do a lot of work with clergy around the country, my big struggle in the last year or so has been all the clergy who just want to put on a nice show. And I just get so tired. I feel like our world is in desperate trouble. Like the house is on fire. This isn't just a fire drill. We've really got some problems we've got to address. And when I just see people want to put on a nice show, I just get mad at them. you know? And I become unsympathetic to them, and that decreases my possibility of helping them. So I'm struggling with that. I'm trying to develop greater empathy for them in their situation, but also a commitment to help stir things up.
Thank you, Brian. We appreciate it.